Hello again. Last week I began to assemble some biographical notes on Marvin, and while I was doing that, I looked again at the introduction that I wrote for the catalog of his 2003 retrospective exhibition at the Oakland Museum of California, which was called Marvin Lipofsky, A Glass Odyssey. And certainly my own opinion about my writing is hugely biased, but I felt that my introduction was appropriate for today, and so I want to read it to you. In the small catalog of the third Toledo Glass National Exhibition, held in 1970 at the Toledo Museum of Art, Marvin and his work are represented with two photographs. For me, those photographs perfectly sum up his huge contribution to studio glass. In one photo, Marvin is shown shooting pictures with a single-lens reflex camera. In the other, sculptures from the California Loop series are arranged in a bold installation that combined blown and flocked glass forms with silkscreen plastic, canvas, and flat and inflatable vinyl. The California Loop series sculptures are some of Marvin's most groundbreaking, confrontational, and humorous works, and after all these years, these sculptures, to me, are still fresh, still engaging, and still intense, just like Marvin himself. While the California Loop series reflected the contemporary context of Bay Area funk art, Marvin is not and never was a funk artist. Rather, the off-center, elongated, organic forms of his glass were the direct result of Marvin taking the material as far as he could go with it. In 1970, the only other American artists in studio glass who were attempting blown glass sculpture on such a scale were Dale Chihuly and James Carpenter, who created a room-sized glass and neon installation in 1970 for the Museum of Contemporary Crafts, now the Museum of Arts and Design, in New York City. Nevertheless, it was Marvin, with his strong and abiding sculptural focus, who helped lead the way in large-scale blown glass sculpture in the United States. Marvin's role in the development of studio glass around the world cannot be underestimated. That he managed to do the traveling and lecturing that he did while teaching at the University of California at Berkeley and at the College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland, and maintaining his career as an independent artist is a testament to his extraordinary energy and to his dedication to glass. When I ask artists what kinds of things Marvin was doing in the early years, how they remember him, they invariably answer that they remember his lectures and all of the slides that he showed of other people's work in glass around the world, or that they always saw him taking photographs. Not only has Marvin influenced generations of students working in glass, many of whom continued to have important careers, but he has also created an invaluable visual record of the history of the studio glass movement through his photography. Here, I'm going to part from my introduction for a minute with an update. I am proud to report that hundreds of Marvin's photographs are en route to the Raykow Research Library of the Corning Museum of Glass, where they will be archived. Thank you, Marvin, for this very precious resource that we will now house here at the museum. Now, to return to my introduction, in terms of his work as an artist, I have always admired Marvin for his devotion to material and to form. His non-objective vessels break apart and rearrange the blown glass mass while retaining the breathy, ephemeral quality that is one of the glass's most intriguing characteristics. Breath is an essential aspect of Marvin's work. His sculptures show us the shape of breath in all its variations. They give us an impression of this etheric substance that is much truer and more accurate than the most flawlessly executed round bubble. It is not surprising that the New York sculptor Christopher Wilmarth was drawn to Marvin in 1979 during his sojourn at UC Berkeley as a visiting artist. It was at the California College of Arts and Crafts that Wilmarth embarked on his series of glass and bronze works titled Breath. Made in response to the writings of the French symbolist poet Stéphane Mallarmé, the Breath sculptures, whose glass elements were blown by Marvin's students, explored Wilmarth's understanding of glass as frozen breath, and I'm happy to say that the museum owns one of these sculptures. Throughout his career, Marvin's single-minded focus on the development of abstract sculptural forms in blown glass has served as a benchmark, reinforcing basic and cherished beliefs that are deeply rooted in the soul of the studio glass movement. Among these beliefs are the notions that glass is a material capable of sculptural expression, that vessels can become separate from function, and that the relationship between craft and fine art should not be based on mutual exclusion, but on an open and ever-expanding dialogue. Please welcome Marvin Lipofsky, the recipient of the 2009 Glass Art Society Lifetime Achievement Award.
Wow. Thank you. It's rather hard to follow John, but I just want to point out something to you, that when you hit the wood with the grain, it cracks. When you hit the wood across the grain, it doesn't crack. And now Henry Hallam is going to join me and across the grain with his head break this board. Henry? Oh. I used to carve wood, so I know. Thank you, and thanks for the honor, and it's been a long time, and all of us here, I can't see everybody who's here, but I'm sure there's a lot of us. We've sometimes worked hard, and sometimes didn't work hard at all, and the results are what you see. So I'm going to show you somewhat chronologically my experience with glass. The only way I know how to talk is using images, because I'm an image maker and I don't have any big philosophy, and I generally just don't like bullshit. And even through my teaching, I've been always kind of hesitant at those people who seem to know everything or know what they know it all. And because you can't. And it's always changing. And the same is in art, the same is in people. How you were when you were 5 and how you were when you were 70, you're different. So I don't, there are no absolutes. And the best thing to do is just do. The biggest problem I had with teaching was to encourage people to continue. Just continue finding, continue working. Some find it, some don't. Some find it early, some find it later. But as long as you're busy and not hanging out in the streets, you get a better chance. Okay, let me show you the slides. Is that in focus? I can't see it. Okay, these are images that are not in focus. Well, it's true. Harvey did it all, and it was Harvey. Nick Labino was a friend of Harvey's in part, but it was Harvey who did it. He's the one who deserves all the credit. And I thank Harvey for all these years that he's allowed me and introduced. I came to glass totally by accident. If you work with glass, you have to also be aware of the haunted house. And as was said before, the first industry in the United States was glass blowing. This is a factory in Scotland where they make bottles. We have some Scottish people in the audience. I can see that now. And you'll see that the glass is flowing out into the courtyard. They're going to make a new furnace. And the last slide there is glass blowing. I very rarely show these, but this is when I was a graduate student, and I went to the University of Wisconsin after spending 5 years at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. I took all the sculpture classes. I studied industrial design, and then a professor of art education encouraged me to apply to Wisconsin to go to graduate school. And when I got there, this is what I did. I worked a lot with clay, and I worked a lot with metal. Actually, the clay went very fast for me. It was easy for me to work with clay. Metal was a little bit harder, but I enjoyed it better. So this is my start. I don't think you've seen this. Crudity Gets Top Award is how I got my start when I was a graduate student in Wisconsin. This is my my work this is Bascom Hill in Madison, and when I was working with clay, the kiln was shut. It was a car kiln, and there'd be a space of about 8 or 9 inches between the door and the first shelving, and nobody used it. So it was always difficult to get work in, so I started to make tombstones. So that's what these were. So every kiln I had, there was a piece in here, and this is the way I worked and made things. All a la Peter Volkus. I had seen some of Pete's work by accident at the Chicago Art Institute when I was an undergraduate, and it impressed me a lot. I had been working with David Shaner in clay, but I never was a potter. I never could be a potter, but I like to use clay. It went easy for me, and it went fast for me. So that's how I got started. This was our first glass studio on the campus at the University of Wisconsin. I built the hood by myself, and these were people. Unfortunately, Roger Lang isn't here anymore, and well, this guy isn't here anymore either. Sam Herman, he doesn't do much glass, and myself, and this is how we all got started. 1964. Harvey and Nick and Harvey, they're the ones who started it all, and I give them my. In 1964, we were invited to the First World Congress of Craftsmen in Columbia University, and Nick Labino sent a furnace that we set up. This is Erwin and Harvey, and we blew glass for the first time in front of the international crafts or arts or whatever people in New York City. Tio Giambruni, a sculptor, and Harvey. And then that furnace went up to Haystack, the Haystack School in Deer Isle, Maine, and Harvey. And that's Harvey's daughter when she was quite a bit younger, the older daughter. And Michael Boylan helped teach and helped set up the program for Haystack. After graduate work, I was hired by the University of California to come out to Berkeley and start a glass program there. This is what it was. I arrived in 1964, which is the start of the student movement. Some of you know, some of you don't, but it was fairly radicalized at Berkeley, and we had Ronald Reagan brought these people in for us. These were all you Republicans can thank him for. That's going to class at the University of California in Berkeley. My first class as a teacher in the first was 6 girls. They weren't women at this time because they were young. And the 6 of us built the furnaces, this one, and started blowing glass. 1967, I was invited to the California College of Arts and Crafts, and we built this little furnace here and lit it in one day, and they started a program there too. Now, I just bring up where these are. Now, these are students from, they had Dick Marquis, Paula Bartran. Did Paula come to this? I didn't see her yet. Robert Ness, Alan Rice. And this was going on in the 60s. I just recall when you've seen other people's slides, remember these are in the 60s. And you can see the influence that some of these people had on who came later. There was a challenge between the California College of the Arts and Crafts and Berkeley. This is Berkeley. And they challenged us to a glass blowing contest. Alan Wasenberg is an architect, a well-known architect in New York City. Now Paula Bartran is on the board, and Michael Cohn's, and Richard Meitner, a student at Berkeley, although they don't mention it, who has a show here at the museum. Briefly. I met his mother when he was an undergraduate, and she just shook her head and said, "Can you do anything with him?" But I think all mothers said that of their children anyway. John Lewis was here in the audience, and a student very early on developed this casting system, which is somewhat similar to what they do here in Steuben. And of course, he's one of the richer students of mine, so he's in his outfit. Michael Cohn. This is the things that they went on to do. Brynhildur Tharsdottir from Iceland, and some of the other students, Rika Karoki from Japan, and Jano Gay. These were all happening in the 70s and so forth, and I think that they were doing things that were beyond their time. Terry Eaton, Laurie Lipsman, Steve Matthews, a very nice piece in the corner, I think very sculptural. Bruce Smith, a lot of neon work, and Carol Schreitmiller, and Larry Hoffers, the assistant studio manager for John Lewis, I believe. So I just wanted to show you what the students did quite a while ago. It started the Great California Glass Symposium between the University of California at Berkeley and CCAC because I was a one-person department. So I felt a little bit inadequate because I didn't have all the answers to everything. So I started inviting artists that I knew of and met to come. The first symposium was with Harvey Littleton and Siebren Felkema in 1968. Just keep in mind these dates too. 1973, I had met Eric Hoagland from Sweden, and we invited him to come out to work. Eric's no longer alive, and also Siebren Felkema is not. And that's Siebren's son, who's works with glass. And Fritz Dreisbach, along with a former student of his, Chris Lonk. Except when Chris Lonk left Toledo, he came to San Francisco and became Christine. And then helped Fritz in one of our demonstrations. Everybody knows Dale Chihuly. That's Dale Chihuly without an eye patch. And Wolf and Willie Anderson also came to visit and do workshops. Johnny Toso, who's here, and Johnny Toso's cooking. He made a spaghetti and sardine, whatever it was, and stunk the studio up for weeks. And then Johnny and Shoji Asahara happened to meet at on the same day from Japan, a master from Japan, and a maestro from Murano. Petr Novotny and Rene Robacek, and I understand that Rene is still doing well in his 80s, came to visit us. At this time, Petr did not speak English, and he was learning English. Those of you who know Petr and respect him from his workshops, he speaks very good English now, but he didn't at this time. Mary Schaffer was in the Boston area, Providence, came out to do a slumposium, and barely made it out of the East Coast because of all the snow and the airplanes. But Fred Dayton, who was the master at the Royal College of Art in London, showed us how to make a yard of ale. Ginny Ruffner, before she was known, was working at the Frabel Studios with two other, Junior and Kathy, friends, and they came out to do working. This was in 1982. Then I met Christopher Wilmarth, and I invited him to come to work with us. I said, come on over, the students would be happy to work with you. He said, no, I don't do that craft stuff, I don't. I said, well, the invitation is open. He was a little bit disheartened with Berkeley. He was teaching a seminar, and all the students just wanted to know how to be rich and famous. And that's not the way he was. He didn't want to talk about galleries, and he didn't want to talk about. He wanted to talk about his art and how his art came to him. And we sort of hit it off and became good friends. And he then thought that there was, at that time he was thinking about doing a series of work about the poet Mallarmé. And he took some of Mallarmé's poems and had a friend of his transcribe them, translate them, and then did a series of heads. And these heads, the whole summed up the whole soul summed up. Susan walked in. Susan was his wife. These were the works that he did out of glass, and I very well respect him. The work that he did with us were pieces like this. And with the students we made these heads for him. He didn't blow glass, but he eventually broke down and helped out. And after that, he was ready for Pilchuck. And of course, they had been wanting him to come to Pilchuck for name value. Pilchuck is a name value place, so and he never wanted to go. And I was invited there, and he said, "Well, if you go, I'll go." So he went up there and did a series of work, and he loved it. He loved it. Thanks, Fritz. Thanks, Penland. Thanks, all the guys. Some known, some unknown, some here, some there. This is how GAS got started. That's GAS 1. This is the GAS 1 mailing list. 22 people, 1 woman. This was the first meeting. This was the second GAS they had at Penland, but the first meeting of everybody in the dining hall, where they finally said, let's make an organization, and Henry Hallam was talking so loud that they elected him president. Is that true, Henry? Well, you're a little oversimplification, too. I did not say that. So this was what went on in Penland, and you see the people. One thing that a lot of us have forgotten, that Jan Zondewies, I think he was in Pittsburgh at this time, was doing lampworking there. So lampworking was part of the very early thoughts of some of the members, and Jack Schmidt, and I don't know. Teamwork. I know you're here in Corning, and everybody says that Dale Chihuly and his team developed this team, but that had always gone on. It had always gone on. Harvey wasn't really good enough to work with other people. Not true. He never was a very good glass blower, but you got to give him all the credit in the world because he's the one who did it. And he manipulated that glass, and he pushed that glass, and he was quite dangerous to be around when he was working. He was, but he pushed. Maybe you can, from some of the things that John said, he pushed, and he pushed. And you sort of got out of the way. So this is how things got started, and people worked as a team on occasion. So the Glass Arts Society got started with a wing and a prayer, or just a prayer or just a wing. And these are some. The first newsletter, which I edited here in '76, but there was one before that, and I apologize, I couldn't find it. Richard Ritter and a couple other people, maybe Mark, put together a newsletter, and I think it was, they left out page 4. Is it page 4? Page 1. Well, that's worse than I thought. So it came out with, it says there is no page 1. So then I said, well, I can shape this thing up. And so I took over, and we started publishing things and so forth. But it was the Penland group who really got everything going. And we really need to give those guys, and some of them don't come to meetings anymore; they get bored. And so, but they're the ones that got it all started. So you see some of the journals and the buttons. We kind of had more interesting buttons then. When we started the journal, when we started the Glass, I included my students to help. So everything we did, I included my students. They helped, they learned they just learned all kinds of things, publications, writing, sorting. Anyway, so these are some of the people, and Richard Duggan helped with the graphics and so forth. Richard is now in Hawaii. We all put it together. We didn't pay anybody, no. Some of you older may remember the work at Fenton Glass Company. Some of the people who were at the Fenton workshop. Audrey Handler working. Jack Schmidt in Madison, Wisconsin. The board at Acellamar in '78. And a planning meeting in New York City with Tom Biegner and Henry is, I thought you were taller, Henry. In front of the Steuben showroom. That's how we got started, and that's it. I must give credit for two strong women, Audrey Handler and Sylvia Vigiletti. Who had the fortitude and guts to sit in the reserve for senior men. They didn't let anybody push them around. This is at the University of California at Berkeley. Women had always been a part of things, This is my work. This is how I started, and I'll just chronologically go through the things that I did. It took a long time to find a Marvin license plate. I'll tell you right now, there aren't many. These are some of the first pieces I made when I came to Berkeley, just to piddle around. I went to Leslie Ceramics. It was where all the ceramic people, Ron Nagel and Jim Melchert and Pete, all went to get their supplies. And they gave me some decals. And so I tried them out on the glass, and I made these things. And those are just, I don't know, just to prove that I made little cutesy stuff. Or I could make cutesy stuff. And this is the work that I started to do in the mid-late 60s, using glass and other materials to flocking. And this piece came about because we were all in the Toledo Museum, and Rudy, right, took us down in the vault and showed us some Egyptian inlay pieces, and they were in little boxes and flock boxes and little jewelry containers. I said, well, I ought to make my stuff ought to be like that too. So I made a whole series of these. This is flocking and copper plating and mirroring and sandblasting. I tried to use all the ideas that people use with glass over the years. And then I started on 1971 to work with what I call the California Loop series. At this time, in the early 70s, the people were making great, big, clunky vases, whatever. You could, put the vase on your yacht, and in a storm it wouldn't fall over. And I said, glass has got to be more than that, and I think glass is more than that. So I try to use the negative shapes, and as well as the positive shapes, and using these. The flocking came about because a friend of mine took me to the Oakland Roadster and Hot Rod show in the Oakland Coliseum. And there was a guy selling equipment to flock cars, to put flocking on cars. I said, oh, that's really interesting. He had made a thing called the Fuzz Wagon. It was a police wagon out of an old, I don't know the year, out of an old Ford. And I said, can you do that on glass? He said, oh, sure, why not? So I looked around and started doing it. Well, at this time, I'd never been a chemist. I did have a color from Kugler, but I didn't use it. It wasn't compatible with the glass we were using. And we couldn't get colors, so I started to go to these little shops that sold flocking for window displays and God, whatever they used it for. And I would start mixing the colors, and then I mixed. And so I put the color in right away. So went on things like this. Small loops with copper plating, and the copper plating came about because there was an electrical engineer who decided he wanted to do some sculpture and came to me, and he said, I can tell you how to plate copper on glass. I said, oh, great, let's do it. And so we did it. He'd been using it on plastic. And then I was teaching seminars where all the students would get together and we'd just talk. And when you're dealing with showing, this is all old history. We would show slides and talk about slides, and so it used to be art in the dark. Art history wasn't the history of painting, it was the history of slides. It was art in the dark. And you never saw the actual thing, you just saw an image of it. So I started to say, well, why don't I do that with my work? So I made images of my work in plastic, which of course was a no-no, and did this counter set, which I did. So I was searching and playing, some good, some not. We had a studio in Berkeley for a short period of time at the school, and there was a McDonald's up the street. And so I said, well, why not make a mold? We had a foundry in that studio, and we cast a lot of aluminum. So I made molds of the quarter pounder with cheese, and this is a hot dog that a friend of mine, Irv Tepper, gave to me in ceramics, and then I copied it and made a glass hot dog, and it's called the Irv Tepper Memorial Hot Dog Cup. And someone gave me this. This was from Canada. It was a bank for Colonel Saunders, and I cut it up and made things. So I was just playing around and searching. It was at Haystack, and Linda Connor was there, the famous photographer. Linda's a great, and she was teaching there, and I had this mold. I made a pickle mold, and so it was the 4th of July, so I made 36 pickles, 36 frames, and they were red, white, and blue. And so it was sort of my Americana. Worked with Irwin, 1969. But the first factory was with Joel Myers when he was working at Blenko. We went in there after hours and played around. And then Irwin mentioned this, and that these were pieces we made for a show in Rotterdam. I believe it was Rotterdam. And I made these things. Now, that's crudity. That's a sandblaster I put together myself. And don't do this at home because it's not good. But I just took an old rusty can and put it on and sandblasted the glass. Then I had an opportunity to work at Leerdam factory, the Royal Leerdam factory in Holland, in the Netherlands. And I worked with Van der Linden, who was a tremendous glass blower, very good. He's no longer alive, but he worked for the industry, industrial things as well as for the unique pieces. And Leerdam had a bunch of designers who did very interesting, unique pieces. So he had a temperament for everything. So this is the first time that I ever did drawings, for pieces of glass. And he would, I would make these squigglies like I learned how to draw and put some color in it and so forth. I was living in Amsterdam with Dirk Valkum in an old building, and I would go down to the factory, and he looked at that thing and he picked up every squiggle that I made with my loose drawing technique and tried to put it into the glass. Was that me? Anyway, so this is a series of work I did at the Leerdam Glass Factory, and then had a show at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam with these pieces. Was invited to work in Finland. I had met Kai Frank, the Dean of Scandinavian Design, at a little international workshop we did in Ireland, and I knew who he was. He came up and said, "Can you do this in Finland?" Of course, being an American, I said, "Well, of course, yes, we can." And so he said, "I'll send you a telegram." So I was in Europe, and he said, come up to Helsinki and do this with the Finnish students. So in 1970, we had a Lassi seminari, a glass seminar, and built this little furnace with the students. There's the Finnish flag. And a few days later, we worked with the students. A few days later, I went up to the Nuutjärvi factory and worked with the team up there and made some series like this. Now, my ideas at these times were just very open. I like to walk around and look at things and explore. And in the factories, they throw tons of stuff out, especially wooden molds. And they throw things away. And there were all these wooden molds in the back of the factory, which I brought into the factory floor and started rearranging them so we could blow glass into them. Any of these ideas are free for you guys, you designer guys out there. We started making things. And that's sort of how I worked. I tried to pick up on the industrial techniques of the factory and adapt them to my own aesthetic, if it was successful. And 20 years after that first experience, I was invited back. At this time now, they had a school in Helsinki, and I was invited back to work at a small factory, Humpila, in Finland, and made some pieces like this with this. It was a nice glass, but he taught at the school too. He helped the students make Unto. I had met a man who was an architect at the University of California. He was from Israel, and he invited me to come to the Bezalel Academy in 1971. Actually came from Helsinki to Tel Aviv, to the airport. and we built a little furnace at the school in Jerusalem with these. Got some guys to help us put an oil burner together, and we all built this thing, and they got started. Now that was interesting. They invited an American to build a furnace in Jerusalem with just a little down the street, or down the road, was Hebron. And they had furnaces in Hebron as they'd been having them for quite a long time. The Arabs were blowing glass, and they had been blowing glass. So I did work and visit those. So this is the Arab furnace, and I think maybe you've seen this before. So this is how they worked, and this is a very primitive, very direct way of glass blowing. This is in '71. In 2006, I was invited back, and so I had to visit the west wall of the temple, and those guys didn't care about me. And I worked with the students there and did some pieces like this, and we just spent a few days together. That was sort of like the 20th year of my visit for the first time. Worked in Vanini. I had met Santillana, who was the director of the Vanini factory, who was married to Vanini's daughter, and he said, actually met in Sweden, he said, "Marvin, why don't you come to the factory? All your friends, all your buddies have been there. You ought to come too." I said, "Okay." So, let's see who had been there. Dale had been there. They didn't do a lot, but they were there. So I came over there and started working. Just before that, I met Johnny Toso at a little seminar in Zurich at the Museum Bellerive, and we didn't know Johnny was a master glassblower. We thought that he just did torch work. That he kept things secret from us until I went down to visit. So I came down there to work, and I worked with this guy Sereno. He was just one of the guys in the factory, and we did some things sort of at the end of the afternoon. And then Johnny, I had a little frustration. I said, he knows how to do. I won't tell you the whole story, but he doesn't quite finish things off too well. So Johnny said, "I'll come out to the factory. I'll come out to the factory." I said, "Oh, don't mess up things for me." I mean, I was afraid to step in the wrong place. And so Johnny walked into the factory, and they just went crazy. "Ciao, Johnny. Buongiorno." And he just walked right up to the master's furnace and stuck his pipe in there and started gathering something I wouldn't even go close to. So we worked for a number of times together, and we did pieces like this. And then Johnny did a piece from that time. We worked in '75 at the Vanini factory, and these are all the pieces that we made. I don't know how he remembered that. I must have sent him slides. I don't know. And I worked with Johnny in Fratelli Toso factory. It seems that most of the factories in Italy that I work with either closed down or kind of have some financial problems later on. So made pieces like this. Used my hand. When I was teaching in Amsterdam at the Rietveld Academy, they had a good ceramics program, and so the students made molds to cast ceramics in it. So I didn't have anything to make, so I just made a mold in my hand. And Mexico, went down in '77 to Sonora, Mexico, and built a adobe furnace. Maybe the first adobe furnace, I don't know. And this is in Tijuana. This is no longer in existence, but these are the guys. It was always just good to see how people related to glass. It's all tourist wear, but they just really had an empathy with the material. And that I always appreciated, and that's what I went to see. Nobody knew, they weren't big. In fact, you could vote for your favorite glass blower, and they had 3 jars with holes in the top to put coins in, but they all went into the same pot. And I was invited in 1974 to go to Tokyo, go to Japan, and met this guy in Tokyo, and he was blowing with a charcoal furnace. So I liked the cut, and this is a glass. I used to call it it's a sake warmer. And he made these things, these wind chimes. He was quite a guy. and then worked in a Nambu glass factory. It says N-A-N-B-U, but it's N-A-M. I made this mistake. In Osaka, and I made glass there and for a couple weeks with friends of mine, Mutsu Yanagihara and his wife Akiko. He's the guy who taught at where John is talking, Osaka Gaidai, and he ran the ceramic studio there before John got there. Then in the glass studio in Otaru in Hokkaido, the northern island, I was invited up there with my friend Asahara and went up there to make some pieces and work. This is his studio here, and it's at the bottom of a big hill. He liked this. He could ski from the sound right into the front of his little factory here, from the top of the hill. And so it was the ocean and flowers. It was springtime, so I used a lot of the colors from the flowers in the spring. I always pick things up from where I am, either the factory or the environment or what have you. And worked in Yugoslavia. Actually, this is Serbia. And there was a big difference between Yugoslavia and the provinces. The Serbian factory and in the mountains. Marisa Mazaros is known now in the United States for her work. This is what we did. So just give you a little, made things like this. They're called fragments because the colors weren't compatible. Although they promised that all the chemist said all our colors are compatible, and then everything broke. Then he said, I don't know what happened. Worked when I was teaching at CCAC with a graduate student, Carol Schreitmuller. She assisted me, and we made things like this and pieces like this. In 1969, Erwin Eich said, is Erwin here? Yep. Oh, yep. Okay. You've got to go meet this guy. He didn't say, yeah, this guy. I said, okay, you got to meet this guy. So we packed into a Volkswagen bus, and his friend Peter was driving, and we drove through the border, and there were big towers there and guards and things like that. So they said, where's your passport? And they stuck it in a little curtain. It's a little bit like the registration here, behind the black curtain. No sign on the front saying registration. They just go behind the black curtain, and then the passport came back again, stamped, and we went to meet Stanislav Lubinsky and his family. And this is a rare photograph of everybody. I think Erwin must have taken the photograph. That's his friend Peter with the children. And in 69, of course, they were still, it was Czechoslovakia, and it was still under Russian control at that time. Also at that time, he was doing this maquette for the Osaka World's Fair. This is the drawing and the maquette. She did the modeling, and he did the drawing. And this is the piece. Have people found out what happened to this piece? Does anybody know? Some of it was missing for a long time. It got dispersed. This is really a crime. I don't know how or what happened to it, but they sold off or dispersed parts, so the whole thing isn't together. It was big. You could walk underneath this section here. Well, anyway, that's what some of my experiences. And then worked in the glass factory with Petr Novotny. He was the teacher of the students at that time. And so I love this slide because I like the wallpaper, and I like the, and so I jumped right in there and made really ugly stuff. But then when it came out, I did something. I always work on them afterwards, so this is how it all came out. And at Pilchuck in '84 with Rich Royal and Robbie Miller, two great guys, I did some work with, they're working just with the two of them. And of course, Dale came in, and this is why he wears a patch. Don't believe those other stories. So he can really kind of scrutinize other people's work, and you won't know what's going on. So this is the work I did, and this is when Chris Wilmarth was there, and he gave me some drawing paper and said, draw, don't mess it up. This is expensive drawing paper, so I made some drawings. and made pieces like this. These dealt with what was going on at Pilchuck, the summer rain, morning mist. I mean, those of you who've been there know the weather is so important and so dominant on what you are. So I try to work with that. Evening slugs, whatever, Then I was invited to the International Glass Symposium, which started out in the early 80s. I happened to be in 82, was in the Czech Republic working, and they were just organizing the first symposium with the government, with the artists union, and with the factory. And they asked me to translate some things, or help to translate it. They had translated things into English, but it was really bad. I mean, you couldn't, they did it, but you couldn't understand it. So I helped them write it, and they invited me to come, to the first symposium. So I came to the first symposium, and and got to work with some of the, and worked with this guy, this team here a number of times. And so that's when it started. Then I've been at most of the invited back. 85, I did work like this. John talked about Dana Zimichnikova and her husband Marian Karl, but they were at the World Glass exhibit here in Corning, which I was part of helping organize, and we tried to get everybody we could. We sent letters to get them all to come. And of course, Corning was, the big draw. And the people from the Eastern Bloc countries really wanted to come here. And of course, they had a difficult time getting out. And we sent letters, and nobody knew if they were going to get here or not. But a lot of them came, and Donna and her husband and a couple other people, and they drove across. They bought an old car and drove across the country, and they went to cafes and drank sugar water and put ketchup in water and stuff like that, and drove across the country. So I've known them for quite a long time, but it was really a great experience. 1988, I was invited back, did some work like this. I usually bring the work back to my own studio, and I finish it in my own studio. I used to do it totally by myself. I didn't have any help. I worked with a team in blowing, but I didn't do it with the cold working. Now it's getting hard to do the cold working, so I don't know. But this is how we worked. It was fun. And I always wanted to be a part of the team. I didn't want them just to make things. I wanted to be part of the team. Again, here's 88, making things. You can see the scale of the pieces, and these are that I did. And another thing, made this big flower pot that's about 7 feet tall. And then I figured out, all this time I've been working with these big pieces, and if I cut them in half, I'd get 2 for 1. So I started cutting them in half. And then also, they were a little easier to work on because I didn't have to lift the whole piece, they were very heavy. They were in the 30-pound category, so doesn't sound like much, but it was. So I started cutting things in half and working in 97 with another team. And I sometimes put the color in and did the work just to say that I just didn't, that I did help sometimes. And some more pieces that I did. Doing a lot of cutting, using a lot of color. Now, these pieces, I think, have a lot of color in it, but the people who worked at these symposiums just used green and white and blue, and they didn't mix the colors. And I started mixing the colors, overlays and underlays and so forth, and it came out to be like you see here. 89, I was invited to a symposium in Ukraine. And at that time, in order to get to the Ukraine, you had to go through mainland Russia, and we had to go through Moscow because we were foreigners, some of us. Oh no, I was the only American there. But the other people had to go through. And they met us in Moscow and then took us to the Ukraine. So I never thought I'd ever blow glass in Russia, but it did. So the symposium was held in Lvov at this time, and at the Artists Union factory for the Soviet Union. And of course, this is one of our friends, and these are all the good members of the party at the factory. And that's 89. Then I came back, and things had changed. Lvov is Russian, Lviv is Ukrainian. And now our guy is gone, and here are the artists working at the factory on the wall. And then I went back again, and things are getting a little bit worse. Capitalism is a hard thing to do. And then the last time I was there was in 2000, and it hasn't gotten much better. I think it hasn't gotten better at all, but that was the last time I went. So the first time I went, I didn't realize this, but everything I met was red. Of course, it was a communist country, but just by accident, that's what I did. So I made pieces like these. And I love this photograph. These are the women in the factory, and they're grinding just one part of the glass, but not one of them is looking at what they're doing. They're just talking to each other. And so you know, this thing about, oh, thank you for the award, you know, it's really, it's must a great honor, and, you know, you should, this kind of, when you go to these places, you're nothing. You're just a foreigner, and they don't understand you, and you don't do things the way they do, so you're kind of an idiot. But then you can get away with things. This is one of my influences. On the streets during the fall, they would sweep up all the leaves, and it was beautiful fall, very nice fall. So I used the colors that they had in the fall there. And this was a place where they had the symposium exhibition and so forth with all the flags from the various countries there. Just trying to give you a feeling for experience that I had that just can't believe that I did all this stuff. So here's work that I did in those times. Paula Bartram, who's my student and my assistant at Berkeley, went to teach at the Kunstfachskolan in Stockholm, and invited myself and Clifford Rainey to come up and do a summer workshop. And so the two of us went up there. But we worked in Sweden, but they're all Danish. None of these are Swedish. I know, you can tell the difference, can't you? So I made some pieces like this, and worked with Rich Royal and Ben Moore. Ben Moore was a student of ours at the California College of Arts and Crafts. He did a little bit of glass, made wine glass and so forth, but mostly did ceramics. But he was a great guy, still is, and worked with him. Then I got one of my best assistants, the Fritz Dreisbach. Now Fritz, you can give him. Fritz doesn't like cane that are kind of lumpy and grumpy and mixed up and not even. So I asked him if I could have some of the old cloddy ones, because I love that stuff. Anything that's misshapen or it's perfect for me. So I got all the other stuff, and we made things with it at Ben Moore's studio, and we worked, I think it was just one day we worked in the studio and made a whole bunch of stuff. And Fritz is orchestrating things there. 83 was in New Zealand, worked at this in Taranaki, this little studio here made. If you fly over, well, it used to be, if you fly over New Zealand, there are little white and dark spots all over the place. Those are all sheep. So I made this piece. This is called Haggett, white wool, and worked there with people. Tulane with Gene Kloss, great. And some of the other is anybody here in that picture? I don't know what's happened to. Some of them have their own studios now, but yeah, it's a definite macho studio. In 91, I was invited to a Hungarian symposium in Pécs. Pécs is a wonderful little town, full of universities and very interesting architecture. Lots of individual architecture in this little town. And I made some stuff here in Hungary. Didn't have any colors. Meisenthal in France. Meisenthal is where Gallet's father bought a factory, and they produced they made the Gallet work. But the factory closed down quite a while ago. But the factory is still there. Now they have a little provincial studio that's in the coal working shop. So I made stuff like this. Violetta was a factory in Poland, worked in Stanisławski, Poland, in the mountains, was in the wintertime. They named their factories after women. You can clap. They all have feminine names. Made things. It was winter and dark, so I used darker colors. Hsinchu, Taiwan, I was invited there with Mr. Tsai, and great experience. Fritz has also been there. And now I tried to get 5 people on them, but I couldn't find one. Working with Mr. Tsai and his little factory and made things. I tried to pick up on the colors from the temples and the colors that were in Taiwan. So this is what I did. Just small pieces, just for a small experience. And then I was invited to China. Now, a couple people had been to China. Bruce Chow had been to China. I don't know exactly how, but he got there and he brought his girlfriend, wife with him, and sort of insulted the people. Anyway, he couldn't work there. He's Chinese background, but the furnaces were too hot for him. Well, you know, that's RISD, you know. There's too much heat coming off of those big furnaces. And so they had bad stories. I don't exactly know what happened, but anyway, he wasn't very successful at working there for whatever reason. And I had a friend, Willie Anderson, who did a lot of work with the Chinese factories, did work with for designers, taking their designs to China and having them produced fairly cheaply. Now, you think all Chinese glass is cheap, but it's not. You can get whatever you want made for whatever price you want to make it. You want it cheap, they'll use cheap glass and shortcuts. You want more expensive pieces, they'll use better quality glass or the best quality glass and take more time making the objects. So they're very accommodating, and they have picked up on capitalism. They know what to do. So worked with this Dadu, this master here. Worked with him twice. Nice guy. And this is what they did in the factory. They made Bohemian cut crystal, which they sold to Japan and Russia. I believe. I think that's the correct story. If anybody knows more, but I thought it was kind of cool that and they're all women. All this cutting was done by women. And the women always wore white hats. Was invited to Lauscha in Germany. Was East Germany, now is Germany, and worked in the mountains of Lauscha and made some pieces there. Lauscha is a lamp working town, and they very famous. Went back with Dadu. Dadu just means big belly, I believe. And then when I was in Italy, I worked with Mario Grasso. And I always thought that Grasso was his last name. But I think it was just Fat Mario. So I learned, so you learn things sometimes. I also had a show in St. Louis and was invited by a friend of mine to work at the Island Press at the Washington University. And so Washington University, they call it WashU. So I thought that was perfect. It was WashU China. And that was a series of prints with embossing and that I did, dealing with the work I did in China. And some of you may know this guy. This is another use of glass. Worked with Steve Powell, invited me to come down to work with him. Steve's another one of these guys. When he makes the cane, if he has any extra pieces from the rod, and it's not in the piece, he won't use them. They're not right for that. So he has these piles of stuff that he doesn't use. I said, that's a crime. So I asked him, I can have him, sure, take them. So we used it. And now his guys work very hard to arrange all the Marini very precisely, exactly. They use a little centimeter and stuff. And when I was there, I just said, we'll just put them on the marver and pick them up. Well, there's spaces between them. I said, that's perfect. But it took them a long time to get that. So that's sort of the way I work. So this is working with the gang there. And made pieces like this. I also went to the racetrack, not Churchill Downs, but the other one, and saw it was beautiful. So I picked up a lot of the colors that came in use for the silks on the drink. Went back 2000 to work in the Novi Bor again of the Czech Republic. And here's the guys running down the middle of the factory with a big piece of mine, and well, everybody has to back up. I worked with a team who wasn't from the factory, and they used the wrong glass. I thought they knew which glass was which, and everything cracked the first day. All the work, and we did a lot of pieces. And so I said, well, I'll just use them. So I made these cylinders, or had them made, and I just put the cracked glass in the cylinders because I thought the colors were nice. So I made pieces like this. And this is what it looks like in that symposium on the day that they allow the people to come in, the community to come in and watch. And they made things like in the bottom here. This was export work. Big, ugly, but really interesting. Back in Ukraine, this was in October of 2000, so it was just a month after the Twin Towers. It was a little difficult getting out of the States and going over there, but I did. And I was working on these two pieces you see here, and a young Russian girl came in and said, "You're doing the Twin Towers?" I said, "Oh my God, I had no idea that's what it was." But she related to those things to it. So it was, take care, the world like glass is very fragile. And that's what I was doing. Worked with Petr Novotny in Frauenau, great guy. I'm sure some of you have known him. Made pieces like these. The Rona factory, which was in Slovakia, Ladice Runa, and this is my first exhibition in a fountain. They put all of us in the symposium, put our work in these fountains. Worked with Steve Powell up in the Berkshires, did some things like this. Never figured out how that was made. I worked at some of the state schools and some of the schools and so forth in Chico, California. Australia, been to Australia, but then I came back to work there in 2004, and worked in the Denizen Studio in North Manly, Australia with Tom Roney. That was a good experience. Things were good. And I picked up a lot on the Australian outback, tried to use the colors I saw. It's overwhelming in that country. At the Jam Factory with Matthew Larwood. I don't think he's there any longer. I don't know where he went. But worked with the team. Just came in, made some molds, and worked with the people. Met my friend again. And Gus Gustani. Gus is goose. I think it's white goose or something like that, or something goose. What? Crystal goose, right, absolutely, right. And did some pieces like this. And again, these aren't red, these are orange, because things weren't totally red there, and they weren't totally whatever else. So it was kind of orangish in that place. So this is about 2 or 3 hours outside of Moscow, north of Moscow. That's my first outdoor forest exhibition. Oop. My work is down here, and these are some of my friends there. They had a Russian minstrel troupe that came and sang songs with us and everything. They were great, but a lot of mosquitoes there. A lot of mosquitoes. Worked at the Tacoma Glass Museum, and was a nice experience. Good group of people there, very nice group of people there. And if you've never seen it, it's incredible. Alex's sister was a gaffer, and we're able to do good things. Here's all the crew and my wife who was up there, and made pieces. Some of the stuff was our trip from California to Tacoma. So this is the colors that the trees and the forests and everything were. We had a gas conference in Oakland, did this piece for a show that we did there, because we curated a show and we put in sculptural pieces, but the Bay Area had a lot of production studios. So I wanted to include the production guys, and so we asked a bunch of people to give us 3 or 4 wine glasses, and so then we just put them all up. And it's called Buy the Glass, Buy the Glass. So, worked pieces from a Murano that I had made over the years, and this was in Palazzo Ducali in Venice, a show in Venice. Did this thing. This is springtime, winter, summer, fall, 4 seasons. I've made menorahs. These are for shows that people put on. I made a kiddish cup for a show also, an exhibit. You can't use it, but that's actually Blenko glass, old Blenko glass, vintage Blenko glass that I polished and put as for wine. Drawing. One of my favorite, Johnny, what's the name of this bridge? You got that. I love this bridge, and the first time I worked, this is just near the Campo Ghetto Novo, and I put the pieces I made, which I wasn't always satisfied with, in the water, taped up the holes, and then I got it in the boat, and I waited for the right person to come over. And I got a nun, too. The film, A Heart of Glass, I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's an older film, but Ulbrock is dead, and no one knows the secret of the ruby glass. Well, this was filmed in Frauenau, at an Erwin's place, and the story is that the chemist that made this famous ruby glass for this very small town died, and with him went the formula for the ruby glass, and nobody knew about it. So it's very frustrating, but I, like you, have a heart of glass. I thank Bess and Harvey, Libby and Nick Labino. They were people who helped us along the way, and they'll be remembered. Thanks, Harvey. I have to bring up my wife. My wife was supposed to be here, Ruth Okimoto. As a child, she was in the Japanese internment camps in the States, and she did she was 3 years. She was a small child, and she did this research about sharing a desert home because the camp was built on an Indian reservation, indigenous people's reservation, and the government didn't ask them. They said, sign this paper, we're going to take over your property, and they said, the tribal council said no, which, they should have, and they said, well, we'll take it over anyway. So they built this camp for close to 100,000 people, not quite, and put the Japanese citizens on the West Coast behind barbed wire during the war. American citizens. That's right, American citizens, sorry. Actually, some of them weren't, but most of them were. She did a lot of research, and she's there now. PBS is doing a film about it with another couple, people who were incarcerated there, and she's there in Arizona, Poston, Arizona, along the Colorado River. It's the Crit tribe. It's a tribe of Colorado River tribe, and the government brought people in from all over and colonized this area. They brought Navajo and Chemehuevi and different tribes and gave them this land in the desert for their own land. Now, they wanted the Japanese there because this was desert and it was on the Colorado River, and the Japanese, they thought, would dig canals and irrigate the land, and they'd grow crops there. But the people said, hey, we're not going to do this work for nothing. And so they didn't. But they did get it irrigated. And now that tribe is extremely wealthy because they lease all this prime farmland to other people. and they're trying to rebuild parts of the camp and make it a historical market, I'm losing words now. Monument, yeah, and dedicated. The tribe is very together and trying to do this. But those of you who've had any experience with tribal matters know that they argue more than the Senate. They just argue all the time, and so but they're trying to restore some of the old buildings and things that they had there. So that's for sure. And my wife typed the first 3 newsletters by herself with her little hands. And that's how we got started. She actually helped us with the Asilomar conference too. She suggested that we go to Asilomar in California, this state park, and we had a lot of people. The old guys still think it's one of the better conferences, but what do they know? Okay. So, blow glass. And Chris Wilmarth wrote his own catalog in '86, and that's all you're going to say? That's all. If it's not magic, it's merchandise. If it's not magic, it's merchandise. So I say to you, keep the magic. Well, thank you. Thank you. Oh, that's all right. Thank you. That's nice of you. I don't have any magic tricks. I don't have any.